I'm 99 years old, and I never went to school. Not for a single day. No classroom. No books with my name written inside. No teacher calling my name in a room full of other children. People hear that, and they think they understand my life. They think it must have been small, limited, that I must have missed something important, and they're not wrong. But what they don't see is what filled that space instead. Because I didn't grow up without learning. I just learned in places no one ever writes about. I sit by the door most mornings now. It's easier than the window. From here, I can hear the world before I see it. Footsteps, voices passing by, children laughing on their way to school. That sound, it still does something to me. Not pain, not exactly, just a quiet recognition of something that was never mine. I was born in a small house where survival mattered more than anything else. Not comfort, not dreams, just getting through the day. My father worked with his hands. My mother worked without stopping. There was no space for questions like, "What do you want to be?" Those kinds of questions belong to people who have time. We didn't. When I was old enough to carry water without spilling it, that became my responsibility. When I could stand long enough without sitting down, I was given more to do. Cooking, cleaning, helping my mother in ways that didn't feel like help, but like expectation. School was never discussed, not as something I couldn't do, as something that didn't exist for me. Other children walked past our house in the mornings. I would watch them sometimes, not openly, from the side. They carried bags, books, a sense of direction. They were going somewhere. I was staying. And after a while, you stop wondering what that other life feels like. You tell yourself, this is enough. And for a long time, it was. I learned how to listen, really listen, not just to words, but to tone, to pauses, to the way someone breathes before they say something difficult. You don't learn that in a classroom. You learn it when you grow up around people who don't say everything out loud. I learned how to read faces, how to know when my mother was tired without her saying it, how to know when my father had a bad day just by the way he closed the door. I learned timing, when to speak, when to stay quiet, when silence could keep the peace better than words. These things don't come with certificates. No one congratulates you for them, but they shape you in ways you don't understand until much later. In my teens, life didn't change much. It just became heavier, more responsibility, more expectation, less space to think about anything beyond what needed to be done. There were moments, though, small ones, where I wondered, what would it feel like to sit in a room and be taught something, to raise my hand, to get something wrong and be corrected, to be seen as someone still learning instead of someone expected to already know. But those thoughts didn't last long, because life doesn't pause for questions like that. It moves forward, with or without you. I remember once I found a piece of paper outside. It had writing on it. I couldn't read it, not a single word. I held it for a long time, turned it over, traced the letters with my finger, like maybe if I looked long enough, it would make sense. It didn't. And I remember feeling something that day. Not shame, not exactly, just distance. like there was a language the world spoke, and I wasn't part of it. I didn't tell anyone about that. There was no point. You learn to carry certain things quietly. As I grew older, I adapted. That's what people do. You find ways around what you don't have. I learned to remember things instead of writing them down. Dates, numbers, details. I held them in my mind like they were fragile objects because I had no other place to keep them. I learned to ask questions carefully, without making it obvious I didn't understand something. There's a skill in that, in listening just enough to piece together what you missed. I learned to trust my instincts because I didn't have rules written somewhere to follow. Life became my teacher, not in a structured way, in a constant one. Every mistake stayed with me longer because I couldn't go back and read about it. I had to feel it, understand it, carry it forward. In my 20s, I got married. It wasn't a love story, not the kind people talk about. It was practical, expected. He was a decent man, worked hard, didn't speak much. We understood each other in the way two people do when they're both just trying to keep life steady. We built something together, a home, a routine. Children came, and with them, a new kind of learning, not from books, from experience. I learned how to soothe a crying child without knowing why they were crying, how to stay awake through the night and still function the next day, how to give more than I thought I had every day without stopping. My children went to school, all of them. I made sure of that, even when it meant going without things, even when it meant working more than I should have. I didn't want them to stand where I stood, outside something they couldn't enter. I remember helping them with their homework, not by teaching, by sitting beside them, watching, encouraging, pretending I understood more than I did. Sometimes they would ask me questions, and I would smile, change the subject, guide them toward finding the answer themselves. They didn't know, not then, and I was glad. Some things you don't want your children to carry. Years passed, the way they always do, quietly, without asking permission. My children grew, moved on, built lives that didn't require me the same way anymore. That's how it should be. But it changes the house, the sound of it, the feeling of it. In my 60s, I had more time, more space, and that's when things I had ignored started to surface. I tried to learn to read, late, very late. I sat with simple books, children's books, tracing letters, sounding out words, slowly, patiently. But it wasn't easy, not because I wasn't capable, because my mind had learned a different way, a way built on memory, on observation, not on symbols and lines. I could manage a little, recognize a few things, but I never became fluent, and after a while, I stopped trying. Not out of defeat, out of acceptance. There are some paths you can't fully walk once enough time has passed. Now at 99, I don't think about what I missed in the same way. I see it more clearly, but I also see what I gained. I understand people in ways that don't require words. I notice things others overlook, the way someone hesitates before answering, the way a room feels when something is wrong, even if no one says it. I learned patience, not because I read about it, because I had no choice. I learned resilience, not as a concept, as a necessity. I learned how to live with what I didn't have without letting it define everything I was. If you're listening to me, I'm not telling you this to say that school doesn't matter. It does, more than I can fully explain. It opens doors. It gives you tools I never had. But I am saying this: learning doesn't only happen in classrooms, and lack of one kind of learning doesn't mean the absence of all learning. Life teaches, constantly, quietly, and sometimes more deeply than anything written on a page. I've lived a long life, long enough to see many versions of the world, long enough to understand things I couldn't name when I was younger. Do I wish I had gone to school? Yes. There are moments, even now, when I do. When I see a book and wonder what it's trying to say. But I don't carry that wish with regret anymore, just awareness, because my life was still full, just in a different language, one that wasn't written, but felt, lived, understood in ways that don't need to be explained. I'm 99 years old, and I never went to school, but I learned how to listen, how to notice, how to endure, how to give. And in the end, those were the lessons I use the most, even now, as the days grow quieter and time feels closer. I don't think about what I didn't have. I think about what stayed with me and how it shaped the life I did live, because that's all any of us really have in the end. Not what we were given, but what we learned to do with it.